Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to go over a quick video and do a quick video on what makes a premium built 1911 and what makes a more budget built 1911. Now, I want to state real quickly that what you pay for a 1911 doesn't always reflect how premium it's put together and how good it's put together or how bad it's put together. So you might buy a budget 1911 that's put together pretty well, and you might buy a more expensive gun that is not put together as well as you would like it to be. So that doesn't, the price tag doesn't always reflect it, but most of the time you can say that if they're asking a certain cost for a gun, that means they have put more time or money into the machining, the parts, and the labor going into that gun. But like I said, it doesn't always reflect that. That could be depend on where it's built, how it's made, the company building it, whatever. So don't always judge a book or judge a gun, let's put it this way, judge a 1911 by its price tag, but rather I'm going to show you how to kind of judge the 1911 by how it's put together. And this is a real complicated subject. There's so many things to look at, but I'm going to give you something to look for and some things to look for to see if, so that you can kind of judge the 1911 that you're fixing to purchase and say, hey, this is worth it or this is not worth it. And like I said, there's a lot going on, so if I get a little bit tripped up on some of this conversation, I'm sorry guys, but we're wanting to try to cover a lot, so we might have to do a part 2 in the future. Let's start with the most important thing, and this is a Chinese Norinco 1911. And believe it or not, even though this is a cheaper gun, it's built in China, most of the parts on this gun are forged. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But the most important thing to look for in 1911s is barrel fit, and all these guns have been safety checked. But you can wiggle this part around on the front, you can wiggle the barrel around. If the barrel is put together pretty tight, and actually, believe it or not, even though this is Chinese, the barrel is not moving. Okay, and then try right here pushing down. There's a little bit of movement when I push down on the barrel, the top of the barrel where the chamber's at. So that tells me that, you know, it's not quite as tight put together as some guns may be, even in the same category. But the barrel up here, which is probably the most important, is pretty tight. Okay, so those two aspects are going to give you an idea of the potential of the accuracy of the firearm. So those are the most important things. Now let's go over the slide to the frame. That's also one of the most important things in a gun. And before I say too much, I do want to state that these fits do not have to be perfect. They don't have to be flawless. They can be a little bit loose. And to be honest, some people may prefer loose, because usually loose means, as long as it's not crazy loose, if it's a little tiny bit loose, it can actually make the gun be slightly more reliable when it gets dirt and stuff in it. That gives it more room to move around. So it's not only a bad thing. Sometimes it can be slightly positive to give a little bit of room, wiggle room between the two. But on your more expensive ones, they will be more tight put together. You'll just have to maintain them and clean them more often, okay? So that's kind of a thought to kind of give on this. But the slide to frame, this gun actually does have, you can kind of hear that. Let's put it up to the microphone. You can kind of hear that little bit of jiggle between the slide and the frame. Okay, that's the second thing. That's the most important thing. Now, this is very little. It's not a whole lot. It's not going to really hurt accuracy. You're still going to be able to probably, this is a 45, and you're still going to be able to probably do, if you shoot and do your part, if you shoot correctly, and you manipulate the trigger and you line your sights up properly, this probably can still do one hole, or basically touching bullet holes at up to 10 yards. So we're not seeing a crazy amount of accuracy loss in the fact that it's that loose. Now, if it was really loose, you might be a lot worse than that. And, you know, I'm not saying that you could do that all the time, but I'm saying this is capable of probably getting 245 bullets to touch, the bullet holes to touch at a 10-yard target. So it's not crazy, but once you start stretching out to 25, 50 yards, you're going to start seeing a difference in the spread between this gun and a tightly fit gun. All right, we also want to talk about, I guess we'll talk about this while we're here. A lot of times the more expensive 1911s, and this is kind of preference, will have a tri-top, so they'll cut this in a kind of triangle manner, kind of like the Masterpiece. Usually those are going to be a little bit more expensive. You see how this slide is cut like that? More triangular. That takes more machining than this does. So that's something sometimes you see in more expensive 1911s as well. Let's go to the back. Okay, one thing you're going to notice on the back of these guns is the fit here. And there's several things you're going to be looking for. Anytime you can see kind of darkness or shadows where the grooves are not lining up completely tight, and believe it or not, this gun is actually very well put together for the price range and probably what was paid for this gun originally. Okay, so this gun is actually very well put together. I'm going to show you what to look for though. You want this back to be almost perfectly flat. Everything around the hammer, show you, everything right here should be flat. When you run your finger through it, this should blend in and there shouldn't be no snag points on that. That means that they've taken their time to blend these metal parts together. This extractor should be flat with a gun and blended well, or there's not a lot of light or shadows in between it. And the ejector should be blended well. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. And this gun, to believe it or not, this gun is actually very well put together in that regard, even though it's one of the most cheapest ones I've got. Let me show you an example of one that, and this is kind of crazy because, and like I said, guys, this doesn't mean that it won't function. This is just saying somebody took a little bit more time on those specific areas. So this is one of my favorite guns, Bull Armory Viper, and I'm going to show you guys that even it is not as put together as that Chinese gun is. See how much light? I mean, there's a little bit on the Chinese gun as well. But you see how much gap is here? And this is not completely flush. So the ejector, the extractor is fine. It's pretty smooth there. The ejector is kind of not flat with the surface of the back. And even the slide right here is not blended well with the frame as well. Now, this is more of a cosmetic thing. It's not going to cause reliability or nothing like that. But like I said, it just shows the difference between, and that's just in this one area. But I'm telling you what to look for. You see a lot of shadows, a lot of gaps. Let's say gaps is a better word. Gaps in between these areas and these areas where the metal meets metal, frame to slide. You don't want to you don't want to see gaps. Excuse me, guys, in those areas. All right, so we got that pretty well covered. Another thing you may see in some premium firearms now is the way that they fit to the optics. And some of the guns now have bases that are wider that can fit bigger optics, and it's just built into the frame, to the slide, I should say. And those are really nice to look for as well. Most guns don't have that, but it is nice in an optic ready gun when the frame is designed around the optic. The slide, I'm sorry, I keep saying frame. The slide is developed and designed around the optic itself. It's pretty cool. I've seen that in some newer models, so that's something to look for. All right, guys, moving on down. Like I said, this is complicated, so it takes me a little bit of time. Moving on down to the grip safety. Okay, here is the same way, guys, and this gun is actually put together very well in this regard. You do not want to see a lot of gaps here along these lines where these metals meet up, and this is good because it contrasts in color. So I can show you when you push this down, all this should be smooth with very little gaps. There should be no places for your hand to catch or no sharp edges, and this gun is very well put together in that regard. The Bull does a really good job, and that's more important than what we just went over. But this is more cosmetic, and this can actually affect your ergonomics and your grip and how comfortable it is. So this is really well put together on this part, but this is not so much in the sense of cosmetically. All right, so you see that you want to look for any sharp edges. That's another thing. I think a premium firearm is going to have blended out all sharp edges. You can see Bull does a real good job on their safeties, just how contoured that is. You don't have no place when you grab the gun over the safety like this. You don't feel no pinch points, no sharp edges. It's all blended very well. This may be a little aggravating for some people, but the way I grip the gun, like it was meant to be, even though some people with smaller fingers have a hard time, including one of my friends. My hands are about the same size as his, but my thumbs are a little longer, so I'm able to get up higher on that and get around that. So this right here does not bother me, but this can really bother me. So looking for a really well blended safety to the frame is very important. I think that shows the premiumness of a gun as well. And I want to state, guys, too, that no gun is going to have a perfect combination of all this stuff unless you're willing to spend probably $10,000 and have one person like Nighthawk go over the gun and look at every little aspect, and they're building it perfectly. You know, it's probably not, you're not going to find a gun that probably has all these things into one. But the more expensive you get, usually you'll find more of the gun built to these standards, to these higher standards, I should say. All right, so no sharp edges. When you grab the gun tight, that's a way you can tell too. If you want to purchase a new gun, grab the gun like this, just one-handed, and grab it real tight. You can put your other hand on it too, grab it and squeeze it, and see if there's any kind of areas on this grip that's going to hurt when you grip it, that's going to press against your knuckles, your bones on your hand. If there's anything uncomfortable, you're going to feel that in a match, okay? Or you're going to feel that when you're shooting on the range. So that's important. This gun has a very comfortable grip. It's very nice to grip, and you can grab it as hard as you want, and it's very comfortable. So looking for blending in all these parts is very important. How they're blended, how they look, how many shadows and gaps there is in between the metal and the plastic and the polymer and the aluminum parts that are on this gun. It's very important to kind of make sure that those are blended well. All right, moving on. Another thing you can look for in what I would say the 2011 platform type style, where you've got a polymer base, is how rigid is the polymer. So if the polymer is real, like bends when you press it, if it gives a lot, it's probably not as good of a quality of a polymer, or some of them are even 3D printed today. So look for that when you're looking for a premium firearm. If it is 3D printed, it's probably going to give a lot, and that can cause some issues, and I would say those grips may not last as long. If you ended up leaving it in a real hot area, those frames may warp some as well. So you want a frame that's pretty rigid. It don't have to be solid. This frame is very solid. The Bull Armories are very solid, but it don't have to be. You can have a grip that gives a little, but if it gives a lot, it's probably not a very premium grip. Okay, guys. Also look for a grip. This one has been stippled. It was fine before, but I just like it better stippled. And look for a grip that has a lot of texture on the back and the front and on the sides. So having a lot of texture, I mean, it is preference. So yeah, you don't have to have that much texture on a gun, but you do want it to have grip and texture everywhere to some degree, because it's just going to make it shoot better and stay in the hand better. So that's another way to check for premiumness. Let's go down to the bottom here. You want the magwell to be blended. There should be no snag points on the magwell. So where the metal part of the magwell, whether the grip is metal or plastic, you want this to have very little snag points from the magwell to the frame. Now if it don't have a magwell, it's not as important, but yeah, if it does have a magwell, you want it to be blended well. Okay, that's another thing to look for. All right, trigger, guys. Let's move up to the trigger. The trigger, you want it to be, you can wiggle it side to side and up and down. It's okay if there's a little wiggle. Preferably it won't rattle at all, it won't move at all. This trigger has very little wiggle, but it has a tad, and you might can hear that, I'm not sure. I'm really trying to move it and it's just barely moving, but it is rattling a little bit. So this trigger is tight, but not as tight as you would love to see in a real expensive gun. But it's just something to look for. If there's a lot of wiggle on that trigger, this one is fine. But if there's a lot, you know, it may not be put together as well as you would like. So maybe something you dislike the more you shoot it and things like that. So that's something to look for as well. So what have we missed, guys? Also, always look for how well the slide it mates with the frame. You know, if there's a lot of gap here or weirdness here. Now a traditional 1911, you'll always have like an overhanging slide. That's okay, but just see how well that it's blended with that slide, and that's just a kind of something to look for. Now some of these GI models will not have the texture like we talked about earlier. That's not really that important, but you know, on the newer expensive firearms, you do want to see texture on these guns. I prefer to leave this one looking very traditional, so that's what we're going to do. Let's leave it looking traditional. All right, guys, what else? I want to show you kind of, we was talking about the trigger, so let's talk about this a little more. This trigger does rattle, move up and down and side to side a little bit more. This is a Rock Island. However, the Rock Island is blended pretty well here in the back. I do want to show you some areas of blending that I didn't like. I've actually took this gun apart and there was a sharp edge here, here, and some here on the safety, and I actually blended those out with a Dremel, just so you know kind of what to look for, because those, when I gripped up high like this, I was feeling that in my hand. When I would shoot the gun, it would start wearing a spot on my knuckles. It was just not very cool to shoot. So this gun has been upgraded, blended better to fit my needs, and reblued to kind of, you know, keep it from rusting and things like that. So that's just something to look for. Like I said, guys, there was a sharp edge. You can look on these safeties. If there was a really sharp corner right here, and I blended that out too, so it's smooth and rounded now. And those are things that I think are important. You may not, but they're important to me. So, all right. So your barrel to frame, your barrel to slide, I should say, check those. Your frame to your slide fit, check that. Those are the most important things. Then start checking all the parts and making sure it's blended, making sure that when you grip the gun, it feels comfortable. Grip it as hard as you can and see if there's any points on your grip that are uncomfortable. Okay, another thing we're going to talk about, guys, is the parts that are inside. So your slide release, your safety, your trigger, grip safety, hammer, sear that's inside, the ejectors. Are they MEM or are they forged? So I'm going to show you something to look for. You can't always look for this, but I will show you what to look for. You see how this has that round circle right there? That shows that this is a metal injected molded part. So if you're going to spend a ton of money just showing you what to look for, there's nothing wrong with this, especially on a budget minded 1911, 2011. But when it comes to paying a really high cost, what you would like to see is a forged part, which wouldn't have none of those little weird circles on it where it's been molded. So basically they just put this in liquid form into a mold, and it cools and it turns into this part. So these are cheaper to make, and they're not quite as quality, and usually they're not going to be quite as ergonomic and smooth as a forged piece. But forged pieces can also be sharp, but they're just going to be stronger as well. So that's something to look for, and that could be, like I said, your safety. Could be your slide release, your pin. You can see this is a Wilson Combat part. This is forged. This is not metal injected molded, but this is metal injected molded. This is a stainless steel piece though, I think, and I actually blended this right here because it had a sharp edge right here. Another example. But you can see this grip safety is well put together, well blended. You can see the back of the gun is pretty well blended and put together. Kimber does a pretty good job on that, even though they do use metal injected parts. And believe it or not, this is one of the tightest slide to frame fits and barrel fits of any of my guns. So, I mean, that barrel is not moving at all. But yeah, there is some things and some Kimbers they get out that are not the highest quality. I will assure you of that. But this one's a pretty good example of a Kimber's been 100% reliable. All right, if there's any questions, comments, leave them below. I'm sure I missed something. Let's talk about metal grips, because I didn't really talk about that much real quick. But you can see this is my most expensive gun, so I kind of wanted to show you. Look how well blended this is. This is Masterpiece Arms. Everything's blended real well. There's no gaps. This has got a pinned grip safety. You can see how there's very little gap right here. Very little gaps up here in between the metals. Very little gaps. Smooth. This is rounded off right here. This is very well rounded off where the safety is. Very nice. Very rounded off up here. Rounded off grip. There's no sharp edges. This gun is just very nice for the price. You can see even the slide release, very well machined, very well rounded off. Frame to slide, it's blended well. You can run your finger, it doesn't feel like a sharp edge there. No barrel movement, tight put together. just a good example of a good gun. The blending between the magwell and the grip is very good. Well guys, it's going to turn into a 30-minute video, so I don't want to keep going with it. I think we've done a good example of showing you what to look for. A lot of it is maybe aesthetics you're going for, that's fine, but when it comes to a pistol you're going to want to shoot on the range every day or take to competition, some of these things are very important. So I just wanted to give you a good idea of what to look for. If there's any question or comments on these guns, we do have some other videos on these guns in particularly, or more concentrating on the one gun, so look those up and go watch them, please. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Please like and subscribe. It does help me make content like this. God bless. Have a great day.